Hello and welcome to a Saturday spirituality group with our guest, Dr. Steve Hickman. Dr. Steve Hickman, who likes to go by Steve for some reason. Steve is, he's got a passion for self-compassion. So without further ado, Steve Hickman, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I don't remember how you actually found me originally, Dan. Do you recall? I mean, I know you reached out to me, but I don't remember how.
I believe it was an Australian man who has a YouTube channel. I forgot his name, and he
Okay.
connected me to you because he's a
Ah,
colleague of yours.
yeah. And now I know who you're talking about, and I've forgotten his name. But
He
okay.
interviewed you on, that's how I saw your
Yeah.
interview, and that's how I got you.
Okay. Yeah. Stan Steindl. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll start by giving you just a tiny bit about me, why you might want to believe anything that I might say. Uh, but I would actually don't take my word for it. Anything that I suggest, try it out and decide for yourself if it's helpful to you in some way. But so I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and found my way in my work. I worked in a hospital for a long time at the University of California, San Diego Medical Center, and I was in the medical school there. Um, but I worked a lot with patients with medical challenges as a psychologist. And in my work there, I worked with people with chronic pain and chronic illness of various sorts. I worked in the emergency room. I worked with people in different kinds of medical settings, and encountered something called mindfulness. Some of you may have encountered mindfulness. It's gotten a lot of press over the last couple of decades. An approach to bringing ourselves into the present moment. I'll touch on it a little bit, but just to say that one thing led to another, and I ultimately retired from UCSD and became the executive director of the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And self-compassion is what I really want to focus on today as an element. I don't often think of it necessarily as a spiritual practice, but I think it taps into spirituality in a way that we just typically don't talk about it in my world. But I've taught mindfulness and self-compassion and meditation all over the world. For several years, I traveled 2 years in a row, right before COVID. I traveled 150,000 miles 2 years in a row to teach all over the world, to teach in Azerbaijan and Chile and Portugal and Korea and China and Singapore and Vietnam and dozens of other places. So I've had a lot of opportunity to help people become more self-compassionate and more mindful. Um, I wrote a book, which sounds a little ironic, the title. You're familiar with the For Dummies series of books. I wrote Self-Compassion for Dummies, which seems kind of counter to what self-compassion is all about. But actually, if you like what I have to say here, I would encourage you to take a look at the book. I don't earn royalties from the book, so I'm not plugging it because I'm trying to make a buck here. Um, I just plug it because I love the book and I think it's valuable. So feel free to take a look at it if you like. So yeah, so let's talk about self-compassion. And by the way, if you have questions or comments along the way, I mean, I know we'll have time to have a conversation or discussion towards the end, but if you have a question and want to speak up, please feel free. I don't really have a formal talk prepared, so you won't derail me. And I could talk for hours about this. So I won't, but just to know I could if you wanted me to. So um, plenty to say about the topic. Um, so I'd actually like to encourage you to engage in a little reflection with me. So just to kind of set the stage for why this practice of self-compassion might be beneficial in some way. And I think along the way you'll discover how I think of it as a spiritual practice in its own way. If you think about times when a dear friend of yours has suffered some kind of a misfortune, had some kind of a failure in their life, maybe was feeling inadequate in some way. You could think about a specific situation or just in general. When a dear friend is really having a hard time because something bad has happened to them, they've made a mistake, like I said, they've failed in something, and think about how you respond to them. Okay, so think about, what is it that you might say to them? What would be, your tone of voice when you were reaching out to them? Maybe what's your body language, or what would you do? Would you hug them? Would you lean into them? Would you comfort them in some way? Like, how would you, thinking about how you would respond to a dear friend when they're having a difficult time. Just kind of imagine that just a little bit. Really, and again, taking the time to think about what you say just naturally to someone who's having a hard time, and also the tone. The tone is often the biggest piece of it. And then imagine a different scenario. Imagine a time when you have suffered a misfortune, failed at something, fallen short, were feeling inadequate in some way. And think about what you say to you, to yourself in those times. Again, what words might you say, when you've fallen short, when something hasn't gone your way, when you've made a mistake? What's the tone of voice your inner voice has? uh, I'm loving the facial expressions I'm seeing here. You know who you are. Um, and like, what's your body language? What does your body feel like? What is it that how do you react? Do you tense up? Do you relax? Do you comfort yourself? What do you do? So, yeah, anybody notice a difference between those two scenarios? Between how you treat a friend and how you treat yourself? Anybody want to share what came up for you in each scenario? Like how you treat a friend versus how you treat yourself? Feel free to unmute if you'd like and speak up.
I'll give it a try.
Okay.
So when I was picturing being empathetic and helping out a friend, right? It's usually warmth and hugs and just very, I'm so sorry this happened and I'm here for you, and really a compassion to them. And when it comes to myself, it's not so much.
Not so much. I'm shocked. Yeah.
Ah.
I'm sure you're the only one in the group here that's
Yep.
like that, right? Yeah. Yeah. And it's fun. It's when we look at the research. Thank you, Renata. I could tell by your facial expression what was going on. So didn't take a professional psychologist to know that, but yeah, so the research. So Dr. Kristen Neff is the leading researcher of self-compassion and has published tons of articles and research studies on self-compassion. And she has a study that identified that about I think it's 77% of people are tougher on themselves than they are on their dear friends, as Renata just described. So if you're that way, you're in good company. It's a big swath of the population that is uh, can manage to be compassionate and kind to others when they have a hard time, and tend to be less so for themselves. And there's something like 16% or something like that of people that are kind of about the same to the others and themselves, and another like 5 or 6% that are kinder to themselves than to others. Those folks never come to self-compassion programs and don't buy my book because they're doing well in terms of taking care of themselves. So yeah, so it there's a couple of things about this. If you have a tendency to have an inner critic, an inner critical voice that comments on everything that goes unfolds in your life, and more often than not beats you up for falling short and failing and frankly being human, you're not alone. And there are a lot of implications to that. Um, and what's great about this is that, I mean, that's not great, but if you think about it, you do have the capacity to be compassionate. If you're one of those who's kinder to other people, you have the skills. You have everything you need. This is like the Wizard of Oz, you know. They went on a whole journey looking for something that they already had inside them. And that's the case here, is that we generally have the capacity. We know how to be kind to people when they're suffering. All we need to do is to learn, and I make it sound simple, how to direct that compassion inwardly. How can we give it a U-turn so that we include ourselves in the circle of compassion? Now, that probably sounds okay. You might have some doubts about why that would be a good thing. What typically happens if I ask people, what are your misgivings about self-compassion, your doubts? Like, if I was more self-compassionate, then what would be a problem? And generally what comes up is that it might sound kind of self-indulgent, like, oh, well, if I'm kind to myself, I'm just indulging myself, and I really need to, be harder on myself so that I improve, or whatever it is. Or people feel like it's kind of self-centered or narcissistic to be compassionate to yourself. Some people feel like they might lose their edge, so to speak, like I've gotten where I've gotten because I'm tough on myself. I beat myself up in order to do better. There's that silly saying, the beatings will continue until morale improves. Somehow we think that if we beat ourselves up enough, we're going to cheer up and get it together. Or we feel like, um, those are the main ones. There's a few others. But what's interesting is that if you have some thought along that realm that maybe it's too soft, it's too weak, it's too self-indulgent, you'll lose your edge, you won't, you won't try hard enough. There is actual research that suggests just the opposite of every single one of those things I just said. And obviously, I'm not going to plow through the research, but just to say it's out there. And if you're interested, uh, Dr. Kristen Neff's website has a huge bibliography with most of the articles in PDF form if you really want to read the research behind this. But really, I would urge you to, once we're done with all of this, give it a try for yourself, and just don't take my word for any of this in terms of how beneficial it can be. So, what is, I kind of jumped in and talking about compassion, self-compassion, without really uh, defining it, but we probably should. We mostly have an understanding of depression. Of depression, of compassion itself. Um, we're generally kind of familiar with that, but just to say that the simplest definition is an awareness of suffering coupled with the desire to relieve that suffering. Okay. So if you're walking down the street, for example, and you encounter a homeless person who's really struggling, really suffering, there are a few things that would have to happen for compassion to arise for that person. Okay. Like, you could very well encounter that person and not have compassion for them. But if compassion arose for you, there are three things that would have had to be present. First of all, you would have to notice them, right? You'd have to actually see them. And you know how we can be in our society. We can look right past suffering quite often in other people, especially, but also in ourselves. So this is the first component of compassion and self-compassion, is awareness or mindfulness. And I'll come back to this in a second. So once you've noticed that person, think about how would compassion arise? Just, like, if you notice them, what would it take for you to have compassion for that person? Well, the next piece of it is to recognize that this is another human being, that, there but for the grace of God go I, for example. In other words, you would have to see your common humanity, that this could be you, that this is another human being who's struggling and suffering. just like all of us struggle and suffer sometimes, maybe not in the same way. But so this is what we call common humanity, recognizing our common humanity, that um, this is the second piece of this. And this is the part that really connects in my mind to spirituality, which is that we're in a part of something bigger than ourselves. So then the third part of compassion for that other person is the wish to relieve their suffering. So you'd be aware, mindfulness, you would recognize the common humanity of it, and then there would be this wish to relieve that suffering. Now, we can't always bring about that relief, but we have the wish to do so. And maybe we do even a small thing like making eye contact or smiling or offering them something, whatever it might be. But the point of the matter is compassion and self-compassion have these three components. So when it comes to self-compassion, it's recognizing that we're suffering when we're suffering. Actually, and suffering is a big word, but even if you want to say struggling or stressed, noticing in a moment that we're actually having a hard time. Now, we all know we have hard times, but when we're in them, sometimes we don't stop long enough to say, I'm struggling. I'm suffering. I feel sad, or I feel fearful, or I feel grief, whatever it is. So this is practicing mindfulness, becoming aware of a difficulty when it arises is a huge thing. It's a simple thing, but it is huge and it's hard to do. So in one of those moments when we struggle or suffer, we fall short, we, don't pass a test, we screw up something at work or whatever, the first step to self-compassion is saying, hey, I'm suffering. I'm feeling this. This is present for me just now. The opposite of that is where we usually go, which is to grind over and over and over and ruminate over something, or try to push something away and deny or ignore it. Neither of those work. But in the moment, could we actually just be mindful of what's here, this moment of suffering? And I'm going to give you a little practice in a few minutes that you can do that brings these three components together. So you struggle, you've noticed that you're suffering, so what? Then what? Then maybe usually what happens in those moments when we're having a hard time is we feel very much alone, isolated, uniquely bad, flawed, ugly, unskilled, stupid, whatever it might be. You can think of all the things your inner critic might say to you in those moments. We feel totally disconnected from everyone else. We feel like we are uniquely flawed in some way. Each of us has our own inner dialogue, but it's generally somewhere in that. We have this tendency to feel disconnected from everyone. Well, here's the strange thing. Everybody suffers. Everybody makes mistakes. We're all imperfectly, we're perfectly imperfect humans, right? We all fall short sometimes, but we forget that in those moments of difficulty and feel very much alone. And um, loneliness is an epidemic in our society these days. The Surgeon General of the U.S. has a whole amazing report about loneliness and how much of a problem it causes in our society in various ways, which I don't have time to get into. But so in those moments, we feel isolated, but actually we are united as human beings in that feeling of isolation. So this is the common humanity, being able to see the bigger picture, the way that we are all connected, we all struggle sometimes, so that we can see there's nothing uniquely flawed or unfixable about us, that we are all just uh, walking each other home, as Ram Dass once said. We're all in this together, so to speak. This is the common humanity. And then in that moment of recognizing that the suffering is here and seeing the common humanity of it, then we can ask ourselves, what do I need? In this moment when I'm struggling and suffering, what do I need? That's the fundamental question of self-compassion. How can I be kind to myself? Right? And most of the time, that sounds really good. I mean, that always sounds good. being kind to yourself. But what we give ourselves is something else. And if you nodded your heads earlier, Renata kind of put words to this. What happens instead is that we beat ourselves up, right? We're anything but kind. We're self-critical. We feel shame, all of this kind of guilt, etc., embarrassment, all these kinds of things come up in those moments. And we're all pretty familiar with that inner critical dialogue because so many of us have it. So this is about asking myself, instead of beating myself up, asking myself, what do I need in this moment? Maybe what I need, again, this isn't really just to get rid of the discomfort, but actually just meeting ourselves in the midst of it to say, wow, this sucks. This is really hard. I'm sad right now. Like, again, what you would offer to a dear friend, if someone has suffered a loss, somebody's died in their life, we can't bring that person back. We can't solve the problem, so to speak. We comfort the person because they're going through it, right? We comfort them to say, oh, I know this is so hard. What do you need? Can I help you out in some way? Let me give you a hug. Let me be with you. Let me, comfort. Let me help you out with some things around the house. Whatever it is, we're not trying to bring that person back. We know we can't do that. What we're doing is comforting someone in the midst of their suffering. And we can do the same for ourselves. So the lesson here, so to speak, is that we give ourselves self-compassion, not to make ourselves feel better, but because we feel bad. And think about that, because this is an important piece. Like, I'm not talking about, oh, this is a feel-good thing. If you practice self-compassion and you're feeling sad, you're going to feel happy. I'm not going to cure you. These things are not going to happen overnight. But this is what you do to get through difficult things because life has difficult things in it, right? So this is like, if you think about, if any of you are parents and your kids have had the flu, you might go to them and bring them a cold compress or something to drink, or you might say some nice things or give them a hug. You don't think any of those things are curing the flu, right? You don't do those things because it's going to make the flu go away. You do those things because it's going to help them move through this flu with greater ease, with some comfort. And the same is true for these other kinds of things that happen in life. Can you actually just give yourself kindness because it's hard? It eases your way through that difficult period, reminds you of your place in the larger world, and helps you navigate through difficult situations. And over time, it helps to teach you how to navigate other difficult situations and navigate away from them and make different choices and things like that. So there's a lot more to that. But hopefully, the point here is that by practicing self-compassion, we can learn to treat ourselves the way we would treat a good friend when we struggle, suffer, fall short, and fail. Is this making sense so far? I know there have been a few comments in the chat, but any questions that stick up for you right now as in what I've said before we kind of try out a little something?
Yeah,
Anything?
yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, well, hello, Steve and everybody else. I'm Daniel,
Hi,
and
Daniel.
I was missing in the check-in, but I'm back. Well, first of all, thank you for everything you know. I wanted to comment on your first exercise. What came up when you did that? Well, for me, it was interesting because I didn't have to go there at all because I'm automatically very compassionate with other people. Automatic. That started way, way, way back before even college. But what did come up kind of surprised me. I was in your office right where you are. I was sitting there, and you introduced yourself. It was my first session with you, and I said, "Here's the most intimate shame that I have about myself." I shared that, and your answer, of course, was whatever it was, and then I broke down. I just cried for 3 minutes, and you just witnessed it. You didn't say anything, but then we discussed it afterward. So I can analyze that myself as the only healing that can come to me is when I break the typical masculine inhibition of, well, I can't cry in front of other people. I can't even cry with myself. So there was so much healing there in that moment that that's a clue for my future.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it touches on a bunch of things that I could spend the next 6 hours talking about. But one of them I just want to say really briefly, it's a whole topic in and of itself, is this topic of shame. And because shame often underlies a lot of our lack of self-compassion. And if you are, anybody is someone who experiences shame, most humans do. Again, this is common humanity. It's helpful to remember that shame actually arises or exists because every one of us as human beings wish to be loved. If you think about that, we wish to be loved and we fear that we won't be. And shame is really what arises when we are afraid that we won't be loved. So we go through our days looking at everyone. There's a poem, I'm not sure I could dig it up here while we're online, but I may try to find it. We go through our lives encountering people saying, love me in a certain kind of a way. And so it's this innocent emotion that we have. And it's hardwired into us due to evolution and various things, which I don't have time to get into, but it's a common thing that drives us, and it causes a lot of emotions to be very sticky. So if you struggle with depression that just doesn't seem to ever let up, often it's because there's shame underneath, and acknowledging our wish to be loved can kind of help with that. Again, I'm kind of doing it short shrift here, but I appreciate even making reference to that. And the other thing being that we all we need each other as human beings, and that's not just like a cute saying. We as humans, we survive because we are interdependent. We require the herd, the tribe, whatever you want to call it. We're born helpless. We need the care of parents or caregivers of some sort in order to survive. We're not like those little sea turtles that just sort of hatch and then just waddle off into the water and go on about our business, right? Our kids stick with us for decades before they're on their own. So we need each other to survive. Everything that you've got, the clothing you're wearing, the coffee you're drinking, whatever it might be, is the result of a whole web of interconnection to each other, right? Even though when we feel entirely separate from everyone and isolated, we are entirely connected to each other. And that's an important piece. And again, that's the kind of spirituality of this practice, seeing the bigger picture, because in that web, we feel safe. We are safe. When you're in the herd, if you're separate from the herd, you're in danger, right? If there are predators around, we need the protection of the group. The fact that you have this group that formed and meets like this is your little tribe for the time being. We crave this because there is safety and comfort in this. And when we feel safe, then we can actually encounter our emotions the way Daniel just described. It requires that web of safety. So I could go on, but I see Kira's hand up.
Hi, yes, sir. Of course, they're doing construction right now. So I hope okay. You can hear me okay.
Just fine.
I don't have compassion for the construction. No, there's a lot of things. Thank you for being here. I really liked what you said about that we're all suffering, and that it's not about feeling good. It's about oh God, I forgot what you said exactly. About attending to ourselves, comfort, rather than like trying to feel good. I just appreciate that so much. I've been having conversations with people lately about like, um, I just think, like this country's pursuit of happiness is, I just have such a hard time with it. I know it doesn't exist in a lot of other countries. And, um, I feel like it puts so much pressure. I just feel like, yeah. So I really like what you said about it's not about being happy or feel, it's about you don't feel well, so tend to yourself. I like that a lot. I'm gonna take that with me. And then I think also, I guess I want to ask, like, so for me, from you know um, early age, I was told by the only people who mattered, my parents, that I should not have self compassion. So um, so the reasons you gave, and I think another reason is for me is it feels lonely to have self compassion because it's sort of sort of leaving the family, like, so I wonder.
Okay.
So my question is, and also like you, yeah, and also like you said, we want to be loved, and I believe you. I guess for me, it's like that's so out there. Like, I guess for me, it's sort of um, more doable to think of like, yeah, I want to not be um, um, sort of excommunicated or ostracized from the pack. But this is maybe this is like wah wah. I guess I'm wondering about the loneliness. How do you? What do you think of how to work? How would I work with that?
Yeah, that's a big question, Kira, and I do have a few thoughts. Um, and one of them kind of relates one of the ways in which we end up with this inner dialogue. For those of you who have an inner critic, I won't assume that everyone has one because some people honestly don't, but it's often the voice of a early caregiver or parent and what they said to you. And in some cases, that those things that those early caregivers did was abusive and harmful and people acting out their own hurt. But in more cases than not, we inherit these voices from parents. And if you think about um, this is a whole topic in and of itself, but your inner critic, if you have an inner critic, if you can look really close at it, and it takes a little work, and we're not going to be able to do this here, but if you're willing to take a look at that inner critic and see what its motives are, it's actually trying to keep you safe. It's trying to protect you in some way. It's doing a really crappy job of it. It's not the best way to do it, but it's what it's trying to do. If it's saying, oh, you shouldn't go for that promotion, you're really not smart enough to get that job. It's really not trying to be hurtful, so to speak. It's trying to spare you the disappointment of potentially failing, right? It's looking out for you. It's the parent who says, if the parent says, "Oh, you only got a 99 on that math test. What's wrong with you? Why didn't you get 100?" They're not really, in most cases, trying to be hurtful. They're actually trying to motivate you to do better because they want you the best for you, right? They want your success. The problem is that those imperfectionistic thoughts get planted in your head, and then you start to feel like you have to be, you're never enough, so to speak. And that's a whole topic by itself. So one other piece, um, I can't resist kind of going here, Kira, that loneliness piece. Um, if you've been, and I don't want to presume anything about you, but if a person has been told negative things about themselves, like you're not strong enough, you're not good enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not whatever, you're no good, whatever it is. When you're a kid, if you're taking this in and you're 5 years old, for example, you're not in the position that an adult would be to say, At 5 years old, you don't say to mom, I really actually dispute that point. I actually don't think that I'm so stupid, because you depend on that person for your survival, right? You have to sort of align with them so that you continue to get food, clothing, and shelter. So you have to almost take in that belief in order to keep your lifeline alive. Is this making sense? So you have to kind of swallow that line. And so, because it keeps you connected, it's not healthy, obviously, but later on in life, when you go to dispute that, it feels like you're threatening the lifeline that you had. It feels as if you would be cutting yourself off from life itself if you were to dispute those things. That's how it gets kind of embedded in you. So it can feel quite isolating at first, because we that's just embedded in us for many years of being raised that way. So it's like breaking a contract we made with our parents, so to speak, and it can feel very lonely. And I don't think I can do it justice in terms of how you work with all of that, but it's understandable, is my point. And even though it feels these ways, there's another part of you that knows that this path of being kinder to yourself, you don't have to tell yourself you are the smartest person on the planet. You just have to say you're smart enough, that you're good enough, that you are enough, you deserve to live your life and to pursue things that are important to you. So, um, yeah, there's a lot more to that, obviously, but that, hopefully, that lays a little bit of groundwork for what this is about. I did find the poem really quickly. I want to share it with you. Um, it's called "Admit Something" by a poet named Hafiz, who was from centuries ago. Um, Admit something. Everyone you see, you say to them, "Love me." Of course, you do not do this out loud, otherwise someone would call the cops. Still, though, think about this great pull in us to connect. Why not become the one who lives with a full moon in each eye, that is always saying with that sweet moon language what every other eye in this world is dying to hear? Everyone you meet, you say to them, "Love me." I just put a link to the poem in the chat if you're interested. So I want to, before we get too much farther along, and then we can obviously keep talking about this stuff, I want to introduce you to a practice that this is your parting gift when we're done. This is something you can take with you and to practice to kind of get a little taste of self-compassion. So first, one of the ways in which we kind of can kickstart our inner compassionate stance, the way we can kind of access that part of us that knows how to be compassionate, is there actually, science kind of suggests that there's ways that we can bring forth this capacity. One of them is through gentle vocalizations. You think about how you show compassion to a baby that's crying, it's comforting, gentle vocalizations and warm touch are two of the means of doing that. So we're kind of uh, so physical touch. So we can actually kind of access that mammalian caregiving system that we have within us through touch, through gentle vocalizations and soothing touch. So I'm going to just invite you to explore a couple of things now, if you're willing. So we're going to just pause, maybe put aside pens and paper or whatever else you've got going on, and to kind of experiment with me just a little bit. So we just want to kind of note how a few different forms of touch might kind of activate a caring system within you. So beginning by maybe just placing one hand in the other and just noticing, maybe even closing your eyes. I'll be descriptive enough that you don't have to have your eyes open for this, to just notice how it feels to hold one hand in the other. Feeling the warmth of one hand touching the warmth of another. Maybe there's a little coolness involved depending upon how you feel. And then maybe taking one hand open and placing it over the heart in the center of the chest. And just noticing how that feels. Maybe noticing the body breathing as you do this. But maybe if you like, taking the other hand and placing it over the first hand. So both hands are on over the heart. And then maybe moving both hands over the belly. And you may have different reactions to the different parts of the body that you're touching, and just noticing what draws you in, what pushes you away, what feels comforting, what doesn't. No expectation that anything should feel a certain way. Maybe placing one hand on the cheek. Maybe placing the other hand on the other cheek. Or maybe placing the hands on the upper thighs, and maybe even just stroking the thigh just a little bit of movement. Or maybe reaching across the chest and touching the upper arm of the opposite side. So right hand reaching over to the left bicep and vice versa. Maybe even just reaching around the torso and giving yourself a very gentle hug. The surreptitious self-hug. And then maybe taking one hand and forming a fist and placing that over the heart and opening the other hand on top of it. So we've kind of got a blend of the fierce and the tender here, and of strength and softness at the same time. And then just taking a moment maybe to return to any of those particular forms of touch that stood out for you as being particularly comforting, soothing, supportive. Just to revisit, maybe experimenting a little, finding what's just right for you that causes you to kind of access that caring connection. Noticing how that feels. Just feeling your own warmth and tenderness. And when you're ready, allowing your hands to come back into your lap or wherever, and we're going to move right into a little practice that we call the self-compassion break. This is the this is the tool you can take with you, so to speak. So again, maybe dropping inside. Again, if you're comfortable or willing to allow your eyes to close, or you can just soften your gaze downward so that your attention is more on your inner experience. And in that, calling to mind some kind of challenging situation that you're facing right now, not choosing the most challenging thing, but something that's causing some stress in your life, a mild to moderate amount of stress or difficulty. It might be a conflict at work or a struggle with a partner or some other kind of a challenge in your life. Just taking the time to kind of let it come alive in your mind. It's been living there anyway. Just giving it a little space to play out. You might notice as you call this to mind the impact on the body. Maybe there's a little tension or heat somewhere. Maybe there's a little shakiness or warmth, coolness. Might even be able to locate where you feel this sensation in the body. So this is mindfulness. This is a moment of suffering. Saying to yourself, this is a moment of struggle. Just acknowledging the struggle is here. This is the mindfulness of self-compassion. And then noticing to yourself that struggle and suffering, stress is a part of living. This is the common humanity. Just saying that to yourself, this is a part of life. That this is how it feels when people struggle, when I struggle. Struggling is a part of living, the common humanity. And then saying to yourself, may I be kind to myself, and perhaps placing a hand on the body in one of those gestures that felt just right to you, that was comforting, soothing, supportive. May I be kind to myself. Just allowing yourself to feel the warmth of your touch, the kindness of the intention. Giving yourself this kindness just because it's hard, not to make it go away necessarily, just because it's hard. And when you're ready, allowing attention to come back into our virtual space here, knowing you can always come back to this practice later time. So this is what's called a self-compassion break. Just a couple of points about it. It's got these three components. This is what I most want you to kind of remember, is that in a moment of difficulty. So first of all, I had you call something to mind, something difficult in your life. I'm not suggesting that you go on about your day and stop periodically and call things to mind that are difficult. Life will be happy to serve those things up to you on a daily basis on its own. But when it happens, when you can catch yourself in a moment, something happens, you're frustrated, something, you have a difficult conversation or some bad thing happens to you or whatever it is. If you can catch yourself in that moment, you can do a self-compassion break. Okay. So when it happens, the three components, mindfulness, this is a moment of struggle or suffering. Common humanity, suffering is a part of living. This is how people feel when they struggle. And self-kindness. What do I need right now? May I be kind to myself? So this can be something that doesn't take as long as what I just led you through. It could take like 10 seconds. Just, mindfulness. This is a moment of struggle. Struggling is a part of life. May I be kind to myself? Or what do I need in this moment? Okay, it can be quick. It can take 10 minutes, 10 seconds, something in between. And letting go of needing it to take it away, just doing it because the moment is difficult. Okay. So this is a self-compassion break. It's a portable practice. It's what we call informal practice. You can do it anytime. No one has to know you're doing it, etc. So play with it a little bit and see if you can. The biggest challenge at first is even noticing moments of suffering when they're happening. Most often we're aware of them after the fact. We're in them, we're aware, but we're not really aware that that's what's happening. We're just in it. So if we can catch ourselves, in a moment, to just pause, like take a breath. This is advice that everybody got at one point in their lives, take a breath, count to 10, whatever it is. It's noticing those moments and pausing long enough to meet them with compassion. Meet yourself with compassion as opposed to anything else. Well, we've already covered a lot of ground.
Yes. Hey, Steve, I want to thank
Yeah,
you for
sure.
that there. And when you say portable practices, that's really, I like the way that sounds, like a multi-tool there on your belt as you move through
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's see what we're going to do now. I have tons of questions, but I'm going to leave it up to everyone else. So I'm just going to jump in here and see if anyone has any questions here for Steve, or I can just start calling on folks.
I have questions I put in the chat. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yes. Anne,
The chat
pardon me,
just
pardon me.
disappeared for me because I
I
had to
have
get
it.
off. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read them for you?
Yeah,
I
could you
see them.
please?
I can
Absolutely. Oh, he
Oh,
sees
good.
them.
I can just respond to them.
Thanks,
Great.
That'd
Anne.
be great. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, and given our limited time, I'm aware that I can only do so much, so I know that there's more to all of these things, but I will try to address them. Yeah, so what happens when we practice self-compassion? So most of us are really familiar with the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, freeze response that we have to stress. We generally have all learned that somewhere along the way, that we have this capacity, we have this system within us that activates us for threat so that we can protect ourselves in one way or another. So that's what typically happens when we're challenged. So, but we aren't only driven by that system. We also, because we're mammals, we have this mammalian caregiving system that we're motivated to care for our young, to respond, to care for each other, to support each other. The tend and befriend system is another way of referring to it. And this is what gets activated when we practice self-compassion with the soothing touch and the gentle vocalizations as we access the oxytocin and endogenous opiates and other hormones that are the tend and befriend hormones, so to speak. So there's more to that, obviously, but that's what we're accessing, is tapping into our human capacity, what we have as being evolved beings. If you think of us as evolved beings, we have this capacity to take care, and we're tapping into that when we practice self-compassion as an antidote to that sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, freeze. If you think about, there's a correlation: fight, flight, freeze. The opposite of fight, if you think about it directed inward, fight is like self-criticism. So self-kindness is the opposite of that. Flight is, fleeing. The opposite of that is the common humanity. The fact that we are connected to each other. And freeze is often like rumination, the opposite of that being mindfulness. So self-compassion is the antidote to that. I think self-compassion, does it change, is an interesting topic. I think we are all, as human beings, this is my personal belief, we're all born as compassionate beings. We all just want to be happy and free from suffering. And we all go about it in very different ways, some of them very hurtful ways for ourselves and others. But underlying all of it is a wish to be happy and free from suffering. So we lose it along the way, especially given the way we're raised sometimes and the experiences we have, the traumas we experience, the discrimination and mistreatment in a variety of different ways, marginalization, et cetera, et cetera. So we do kind of get it, I don't want to say beaten out of us. In some cases, that's actually true, but in one way or another, we do lose it along the way. Thankfully, we can get it back. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a particular age, except to say, I want to tell you all about one really cool study that I just love. And I can't tell you this, I can't give you a reference, but some colleagues at the University of Wisconsin did a beautiful study with little children, like preschool age kids. And which to me, this whole study demonstrates this inherent compassion that we have. They were teaching mindfulness to kids. So they were teaching kids how to be present, how to be focused and settle and behave well in class so they can learn. So they were teaching them attention skills, basically. But what they did as part of the assessment was they also gave each of them a whole bunch of stickers and envelopes with pictures of all their classmates, because this was in a classroom. And they said, you get to decide who gets this supply of stickers. There were X number of stickers, 10 stickers, and you've got envelopes for all of your friends. You get to decide who gets the stickers. So what they tended to do was to put the stickers in the envelopes at first of certain kids. that they were their friends. So they tended not to give stickers to the kids they didn't like, right? So they went through this mindfulness training where they just settled and focused and kind of accessed their own inner wisdom. And then they gave them the same test again at the end. And what they found at the end was they distributed the stickers evenly across all the kids. They weren't even teaching compassion. They weren't talking to them about being kind to everyone else. They were just having them be them. And yet somehow or other, what came out of that was this tendency to be kind to everybody, which I think, I mean, I love the expressions on a few of your faces there. You get it, right? There's this natural capacity when you clear the decks of all the other stuff that naturally arises, this natural capacity to be compassionate. And everybody here, every human has this in them. So
Thank you. I actually just wanted to ask specifically because
yeah.
we have a class on hormones and mental health. Does progesterone, estrogen, testosterone have anything to do with self-compassion? Have you noticed any studies on that? And I noticed for me personally, after 50, something happened as a woman where I have a lot more self-compassion than I did before. I don't know if it's hormonal or societal. Just questions on those three hormones.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything about those specifically. But I also think that there is something about age and wisdom, honestly. So I tend to think of it more from a behavioral standpoint, being a psychologist, than from a hormonal one. I could see how those things could play into it also. And with a little more thought, I could say more, but I'm not aware of any sort of science around that. But I'm just thinking my wife just started using the hormone replacement patches. So her friend calls them her happy patch. So we'll see if she's already pretty self-compassionate. So we'll see how that goes. So thanks, Anne. Other questions, comments? I think there weren't any others that I missed, I don't think, that were in the chat.
No, that was it. I'm going to thank you, Steve, because you answered my question. My question was going to be, how do these practices, because I was thinking about what Kira said when she was talking about the country and the issues we have with the pursuit of happiness and then the leaving the tribe. But then if the whole tribe starts these practices, then there becomes like no need, to. So I really, really like the idea, and I like what they saw with the kids and the stickers, because that brings so much hope right now.
Exactly.
Yes,
I
yes.
want to say one thing, thank you, because that reminded me of one thing Kira said that you just said too. We're as presuming everyone here is Americans, we hear a lot about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We often forget that it's the pursuit of happiness. It's not life, liberty, and happiness, right? So we often get that message implicitly that somehow we're supposed to be happy, like should be our steady state. We have the right to pursuing happiness, but we often think about it as an endpoint, right? Like we need to be there. And so we beat ourselves up when we're not happy, right? Which of course, again, kind of counterproductive to beat yourself up for not being happy in order to become happy, So there's just that. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say, mindfulness and self-compassion are everything that I've said. They can be cultivated by practice. And one way in which that can be done is the way I've described with this informal practice of a self-compassion break. Just asking yourself, what do I need, is practicing self-compassion. And it can be cultivated even more effectively with, just like exercise, like physical fitness with exercise, practicing these things like practicing meditation. There's a lot of different kinds of meditation, but mindfulness meditation, which is really just taking the time to stay present for a period of time, following the breath or a sound or the body in some way, is a way of cultivating a mindful state, a mindful way of being. So the more that you practice it formally, the more likely you're going to be able to access it when you need it in daily life. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit, because a lot of our programs that we teach, the mindful self-compassion program that I used to train people and I teach sometimes, is a meditation-based program, and most of the mindfulness programs are meditation-based programs. Nothing magical about meditation. It's just a means of practicing, exercising the heart and mind to become more mindful and self-compassionate. So that's it.
Quick question, and then I'm going to go to the rest of the folks. Within that, there was a piece where you were talking about how we realize afterward. Would you say it would be beneficial to sometimes take those snippets and reframe them and say, like, hey, what would have been a more compassionate way to handle this, situation A that I was in, and kind of like building up, because you can never repeat, you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the way I like to think about that is if you think about situations that didn't go well, you didn't handle well, they unfolded badly or whatever. So it's important to say, okay, so if you think back to the last time you didn't handle some interaction with someone else, well, I'm sure everyone can recall something, maybe several somethings that just happened in the last 24 hours. If you, first of all, if you just sitting here now call that to mind, you can probably conjure up a better way to have handled that than you did, right? So think about that for a second. What does that mean? That means that you didn't, unless you went off to a training on how to handle those kind of situations between then and now, you had it with you at the time. You just couldn't access it, right? It was just because you were in fight or flight mode, you couldn't access it. So yeah, calling those things to mind when you're calm, when you're not pissed off, when your nervous system is not activated, often allows you to access that inner wisdom. And there's something to be said for, I guess, practicing that. But the more that you can practice bringing yourself into the present moment, settling your nervous system, the more you're likely to encounter new things with that inner wisdom in your tool bag, and able to access it. So that's another way of looking at it. So
Great. And we have Chaplain James here, has his hand raised.
I like you, Doctor, because what you say, and also with your thing with practice, that also answers Tiffany's question. Because if you like go back and redo it, how you would deal with a certain situation, that would also make you better. So that's part of practicing. So I like you because you know your stuff, and I will be writing to you.
Okay. Thanks, James.
You're welcome, sir.
Yeah. This is really, I often talk about this, lots of people do, it's not just me, is these practices allow us to access our own inner wisdom. I'm not giving you guys anything that you don't already have, like I said earlier about the, Wizard of Oz thing. This is about being able to get to what you already have in your heart and your mind that you were born with, that we were all born with, and just making use of it and allowing ourselves to bring all of our available human resources to bear on moments of struggle and suffering, joyful moments, all of the above. We often need to kind of balance. Our minds, as you all are well aware, we have a tendency to gravitate towards problems and difficulties. If you think, like if you get a work evaluation, where they go through the big long checklist and you got excellent, 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 average, excellent, excellent, excellent. What are you going to remember, right? We're going to walk out of there and it's going to be that average one, right? Because our minds, as Dr. Rick Hansen says, our minds are Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. They just slide right off, right? But the good news is that our brains are plastic. That means they can change over time, and we can train them by purposely taking in the good, by opening up to the pleasant things, the things we're grateful for. We can shift that tendency away from being preoccupied with the negative to have a balanced view. We're not talking about pretending everything is rosy and everything's perfect and all is well. Just being able to see the full range of human experience and to see there are both pleasant and unpleasant, joy and sorrow, et cetera, et cetera. And that goes a long way for helping us prevent slipping into depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, looks like Anne has her hand up.
Sure. Could you comment on psychiatry and self-compassion? I'm just thinking about, you're talking about like job reviews. I think about reading the notes from the 80s, 90s, and even up to 4 years ago, the hospital notes, what people wrote about me. And also some of the treatments, quote unquote treatments I've had from people. And it really didn't bring out, it was like opposite. It was teaching me I am wrong, my thinking is wrong. How and are you working with psychiatry to help bring more of that inner sense out?
Yeah, that's a huge topic, but I would say, so if you think about, I was having this conversation with my son this morning about in a related way, but psychiatry in particular, but psychology as well, is based on primarily on a model of pathology, of illness, of mental illness. And so the focus there, especially in psychiatry, and I don't want to oversimplify because there's some amazing psychiatrists who've helped a lot of people, and probably people here. So I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing, but it's built on a model of dysfunction and how can we correct that problem, and how can we, rebalance your brain chemistry or whatever it might be. So, and there are places for that. It's not really built on strengths. And positive psychology is a realm of psychology that's getting a lot more attention now, is talking about how do we not only overcome, well, instead of focusing on how do we overcome problems, how do we harness the positive aspects of the resources the human has to contend with what they have in their life. So it goes from an assumption of wellness rather than an assumption of illness. And again, it's not like it applies for everyone in a similar fashion. But when you're looking at a disease model, when you're thinking, your depression is persisting because you have a brain disorder of some sort or a chemical imbalance, and we're going to help correct that chemical imbalance with medicine or some other kind of treatment, that only goes so far. And it doesn't actually help a person empower themselves to navigate through that territory by accessing what do they have going for them. And we all, as human beings, when you look at yourself, there's way more right with us than wrong with us. And so this approach is really kind of shifting that direction. Not to say that's all there is, but to make room for that part of us, that we do have human capacities. We have a capacity for compassion. We gravitate towards wellness, not towards illness. And we have all of these other things that we can kind of tap into. So there are ways in which, when you practice mindfulness, for example, there's something called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy that was originally developed to help people prevent relapse in depression. And it's teaching people, some of you are familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, which sometimes it sounds like a focus on negative thinking, because a lot of times you're looking at how do you think about things, and how is it that the way you think about things leads to a change in your mood. If you tend to think that this things are all bad, then you're going to start to feel sad. I mean, to way oversimplify it. But what cognitive behavioral therapy does is it helps people recognize that the way they think, not the way things are, but the way they think, leads to the way they feel. And the magic in all of that is not that you then have different thoughts that lead to a different outcome, but that you recognize these are all just thoughts, that thoughts are not actually facts. That's what we understand about cognitive behavioral therapy, is that piece of it is that we change our relationship to the thoughts we have. So just because, what is it? I'm not going to think of it all of a sudden. It's not going to come to me. But the point being, what mindfulness allows us to do is to stay present and watch the thoughts come up, and not buy into them just because we thought them, but to say, oh, I'm thinking I'm bad. I'm thinking the world sucks. My thought that, the thought that's here now is this. And then we can choose to buy into them or not. That's the piece that's healing about mindfulness. Not so much that they're bad thoughts and we should have different ones. And I love CBT. I mean, don't get me wrong. Because it's helped a lot of people, but it isn't about learning new thoughts. Like, extracting the bad thought and putting in a new one. It's having this framework, this way of looking at thoughts as that thoughts are not facts. Don't believe everything you think. That's what I was trying to remember earlier. It's a bumper sticker, right? That's CBT on a bumper sticker. Don't believe everything you think. So anyway, thanks for that. It looks like
I
Kira has something.
prescribe the CBT too, doctor.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yes.
Steve, I
Oh, we
have
got,
a question for you.
we've had Kira with her hand raised for a bit there.
Oh,
Can we circle
okay.
back to
Yeah.
Daniel?
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yes.
I yeah, I don't even know how to really form this question, but something about like what do you think of how do you think of reconciling compassion and um, you know, focusing on the group, on the whole, or the group, or the pack with selfishness? I mean, I guess I'm thinking of my dogs who, um, you know, do focus on the group and they are compassionate, but they're also selfish, and you know, and they had a, you know, this wasn't because of trauma or anything. That's just how they are. So
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
wondering.
no, I think that's a common sort of misconception that maybe practicing self-compassion is like somehow self-indulgent or selfish. And the way I think of it is, first of all, you know, when you're on the airplane and they're giving you the instructions about safety and everything, and they say if you're traveling with a kid and the oxygen mask falls, you put the mask on yourself first so you can help the other person. So this is sort of like you give yourself compassion so that you can give compassion to other people. Um, and think about in terms of this being feeling like it might be self-indulgent, like, and I know a lot of women in particular get messages about caring for others first, and you give and you give and you give to everyone else. That's a, you know, that's just a thing. If you think about, I use parenting as a great example. So if your 5-year-old comes down in the morning and says, "Mommy, I'd like to have strawberry ice cream for breakfast." So the compassionate response to that is not, "Oh, sure, let's get some out for you," right? The compassionate response is like, "Well, we have, you know, ice cream for dessert, but if you'd like a healthy breakfast, you know, you can have this or that." So we make a healthy choice. We make the best choice in the bigger perspective. We don't just it isn't just indulgence. It's not making the person happy. It's doing what's right. So it's same with self-compassion. So we actually know that people who are more self-compassionate more easily make change, desired change, like can it's easier for them to quit smoking, to exercise more, things like that, because they're making decisions for their well-being, not just the easiest decision. And there's cool research about a lot of this stuff. So what can seem self-indulgent is actually in your best in the best interest of you, which makes you a better person, able to take care of other people and to care for other people as well. So I don't know, that doesn't completely touch exactly what you said, Kira, but I think it comes close. And it doesn't, at first it feels self-indulgent because you're not used to doing it. And we get a lot of messages about putting everyone first, but we can't put everyone, you know, people say, "Oh, well, you can't be compassionate to others unless you're compassionate to yourself." That's actually not technically true, because you all know this, right? You could care for others until you're just like dead on your feet, you know? But the point being that you can't, it's not sustainable. You can care for other people and not care for yourself for a while. It's sort of like, you know, you could drive your car forever and ever with ever getting it serviced, but at some point it's going to die. If you take care of it, it's going to last a lot longer. So it's the same idea here. Like you take care of yourself and you can provide more of that care for other people. That makes sense. Maybe we could circle back to Daniel's question first and then Renata.
Oh, yes, thank you. Actually, my question was exactly what you just last said. Imagine with all your all your teaching and work with clients and traveling around, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that when COVID hit, I was about to leave on a basically around the world trip to Singapore and India to teach, and I was frankly a little relieved because I had been doing too much traveling. So I'm not, I'm mostly pretty good at self-compassion, but we all have our areas to work on. The good news is that I think you can do a lot if you're I like to use the term breathing underwater. Like you have to, it's an ongoing practice. In other words, we can take care of ourselves along the way so that we can take care of other people or we can tend to other people. It's easy to get burned out if you're not practicing self-compassion. And that's part of it is recognizing that in order to sustain, in order for me to do what I was doing, I had to take care of myself so that I was healthy and alert and that sort of thing. It's not easy because we have a society that rewards pushing yourself to the limits, always being productive, you know, always being, it's like a badge of honor to be too busy. In a way, and we need to kind of nip that in the bud. We also have this what's it, FOMO, fear of missing out, right? That like I've been subject to for a long time, where I would get invited to go do something to teach somewhere, and I would be like, well, I should say yes because I don't know if anyone's ever going to ask me again, despite the fact that people were repeatedly asking me. But it drives us, we get in this idea that we need to do, go all the time and not put any gas in the tank. It's just a constant reminder. I don't know. That's a kind of not a great answer, but I think that addresses it. It's really bad if you're a teacher of self-compassion and you don't actually practice it, by the way. It's kind of hard to pull that off.
Yeah, I was just checking that you take it. I'm sure you do. And one last thing,
I got a couple of years of staying put with COVID that helped me cure me of that a little bit too. So, I mean, not having COVID, but going through it.
Where are you based exactly?
I'm on the central coast of Oregon in a town called Newport.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Renata.
I just FYI, folks, we have 8 minutes left, so we'll take Renata's question and then start
wrapping up.
Yes.
It's actually a comment that has helped me for Kira. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that name. For the self-care, the self-compassion, the self-love, and trying to balance that of thinking it's selfish and all that stuff. And it's just a quote that has helped me, and I try to remind this always, that a friend once told me, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? I work with kids, and of course, at all times, every single day, we want to give. And then it gets to a point where we can't anymore because we're empty. And then we start making little mistakes here and there and not actually providing the kids with what they need or how we wish we were providing them that help and all of that. So I don't know if that might be helpful or not. It's just something I have it on my cubby. Yeah, it's cool. And it's like, you can't pour from an empty cup. You gotta just focus on, take care of yourself so you can help others in a healthy manner. That was it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for that. And I would say many of you may be familiar with the Serenity Prayer that's used in 12-step programs, right? Which there's a ton of wisdom in that, and it's really not far at all from mindfulness. Is sorting out, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This practice is a wisdom practice of being able to sort out where you can do things and where you can't, and not getting caught up in the places where, trying to make things happen where you can't make them happen, and putting your energy into where you can. And I could go on, but I won't because I know we're coming to the end here. But
yes.
It's been a pleasure. And thank you so much, Dan, for inviting me.
I wanted to say really quick, Steve, you did tap on how you could teach excuse me, to the children, which I love, because I think it's just incredible, how you do that. How would you say you would teach this to the older kids, but the younger teens and things like that? Is there a different way, with their capacity to? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there are, like everything else, things need to be developmentally appropriate, but there are folks doing this work with super young kids and teens. If you're interested in teens in particular, there is a friend of mine who is a researcher and teacher named Karen Bluth, Bluth, at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, who's written a number of books on mindfulness and self-compassion for teens in particular that are very good. And there's a mindful self-compassion program for teens out there. And then just another plug for some friends of mine who I haven't seen for a while. For younger kids, there is a group called the Holistic Life Foundation. They're in the Baltimore area. They are the three coolest guys, two brothers and their friend, who have been teaching in the inner city, teaching yoga and mindfulness in schools with little kids, 5, 6, 7 through probably 10, 12, something like that. I haven't looked at their website or anything for a while, but they're just the coolest guys and they do amazing work. And you watch these kids in the classroom. I've watched a couple of classrooms that they've taught in, just magical stuff that they're able to do for kids who are in tough circumstances financially and able to do make a lot of inroads and helping kids, because that's our future, right? So you guys that work with kids know this is where we need to be doing it, so that when you get to be our age, all of us, you've got the tools within you, you've got the skills to avoid a lot of things. So
thank you so
All
much.
right.
I particularly
No, you go
I
ahead,
particularly
Cecilia.
I particularly like the exercise that you did with the fist and then the hand over the fist. It's like you feel very powerful, but yet I'm still here. I'm still here. I just love that exercise. Thank you so much for being here,
Thank
Steve.
you. Thank you. I have to give credit
Right.
really quickly. That gesture of the hand fist with the hand over it was come up with by a New York City firefighter who attended one of my mindful self-compassion programs, where he was saying all this like soft stuff. I can't do this in the firehouse with the guys around. He said, but I can do that. Like that felt right for him as a man, that somehow that worked for him. And I've loved that ever since, because it's a blend of the tender and the fierce part of self-compassion, which I didn't even get to talk about today. So thanks for noticing that.
All right, and for those of you with cameras on, can you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a thumbs sideways if you think you can start practicing self-compassion?
There we go.
Oh, wow, even Kira. That's great. What about you, Tiffany? Oh, you got a thumbs up right there. There you go. All right.
Definitely.
All right. Good, Chaplain James. We got a tooting horn from Donald Cohen and a thumbs up from Ann Casper. Oh, and we got a whole hand on the screen from Sandy Allen Brower. All right. So I just want to thank you, Steve, for coming and speaking and sharing the wisdom of self-compassion with us, and the how essential it is really to coping with life struggles. And I want to thank Tiffany for moderating for a large part of the group. You did a great job, Tiffany. Thank you. Cecilia, hopefully you could step up a little bit more next week if you're here. I sensed a little anxiety, but that's okay. We're only human. So now for the last 2 minutes of this group, Steve, can you close us out with some wisdom before I shut down the video?
Oh man, I have to come up with another piece of wisdom on the spot. Yeah, okay, yeah. Be willing to be a slow learner at all of this. you'll get everyone's here excited, thumbs up, everything like that. And it's a simple practice, but it isn't easy. So be willing to be a slow learner and know that you're going to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back.